You're listening to The Virgin Sex Educator, a podcast devoted to tackling the taboo and finding the connection between spirituality and sexuality. To submit your anonymous questions, click the link in my Instagram bio. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my LDS parenting series in partnership with sexedrescue.com. Today is the last episode in my 10-episode series that I have been doing for my master's practicum. And for people in the US, that's basically like my master's internship. I have had such a great time going through each of these topics and researching them from a perspective of teaching parents rather than just teaching adults, because I primarily work with just adults. So a lot of those adults happen to be parents, and of course they always ask me questions about how to teach their children. So this internship has just been a wonderful opportunity for me to further my personal education on the developmental stages of children and how those exist within the sphere of sexuality, because I know a lot of this just from my studies in general, but being able to devote the last 6 months to just studying the impacts of each of these topics on children throughout each developmental stage has been so great for me, and I've really enjoyed making this series. So to round us all out, I wanted to tackle a topic that to me is one of the most important out of any topic that I could ever discuss, especially with women. I specialize in sexual dysfunction, so I have the majority of the women that I am meeting with one-on-one. They have some sort of sexual difficulty that they are dealing with, and I work with both them and their spouses to help tackle those issues and come to a place where they feel more comfortable and that they're getting rid of pain or any sort of issues that they may be having around desire. And something that I have observed over the last few years is how many women sit in my office that are grown women and they have terrible body image issues. They have a real problem looking at themselves as beautiful, as hot, as sexy, as, a desirable person, and having their own desires and wants and feeling like they have a voice in their sexuality and feel embodied by their sexuality. There's just a huge disconnect from that. And for a lot of them, it stems from a negative self-worth and a negative body image. And so with this last topic, I really wanted to talk to parents who have daughters and look at how we can help them with body image specifically. Now, this is also a topic that means so much to me personally, because I was someone who, as a teen, very much struggled with my body image, and I had an eating disorder that was really difficult. And in my adulthood, by the time I turned 18, I really was more curious about all of the things that led me down that path that made me so miserable. And I just never wanted to feel that way again, and I never wanted to make the choices that I had made again. And I felt a lot of shame, and I felt a lot of insecurity. And so the journey that I personally have been on in the last decade has been one of understanding my body and its capabilities and coming to a place not only of, body positivity, but more body neutrality, being forever grateful for my body and feeling embodied by my sexuality and making more choices that align with my values when it comes to my body and respecting it in the way that I speak about it, the way that I view myself. And I have done so much in my adulthood to work towards that goal. I have taken classes literally called body image and weight management in college. I did something called the Body Project, if you've ever heard of that. I read books like More Than a Body. I did entire programs. I went a year without makeup. I was doing what some may view as like very extreme things, especially in my early 20s. But it all stemmed from this place of wanting to just drastically change the way I felt about myself, and also understand why I cared so much about how other people viewed me and what my body looks like and where that comes from, and all of the different pieces and parts that play into that thinking, not only from society and how the world views women and often sexualizes them, and how our bodies are often used as this means to gain power, and then also looking at it from the lens of the LDS culture and how that plays a part. I mean, Utah has per capita like the most amount of plastic surgeons. How when you're surrounded by a lot of beautiful people and you yourself don't feel like you fit into that, how that affects someone. And then also religiously, being taught that I had worth, but that it was very highly linked to what I did for others, and how that played a huge role in how I looked at myself and how I viewed myself. And all of this has culminated into a personal journey that I have been on, and one that I love to share with other women, because in my work now, where like I said, I almost exclusively work with adults and I help them, I'm able to see what led them to where they are. That doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have poor body image that you're immediately going to have sexual dysfunction. That's not what that means, but there is a large number of the women that I work with that do have sexual dysfunction, and when they work through with their therapist, who's not me, I'm an educator, when they work through with their therapist, they're able to really narrow that down to a negative body image is kind of where it began and created a lot of the dysfunction that I then help them with. So it's all interconnected, and I think if I'm speaking to an audience of just women, then I think we get it. It's kind of impossible to not be affected in some way in the way that society views our bodies, tell us how we need to view our bodies. And when it comes to having this conversation with daughters and just with the younger generation in general, there's a better way. There is so much research out there, and I have studied it so much. So I wish that I could take the last 10 years of what I have done personally for my own journey, but also for my career, and having this topic means so much to me. I wish that I could just take all of that and give it all to you, but that would take a lot longer than 30 minutes. So in this short time, I am just going to talk about the way in which we can change the conversation, just in the same way that all of these episodes have been pointing towards values, right? It's been, instead of don't do this and do it this way, it's instead teaching your kids how to develop sexual integrity, how to work towards healthy, intimate relationships. And we want to keep with that same mentality, but we want to teach our daughters how to think about themselves and how to create a healthy, intimate relationship with themselves, with the way that they speak to themselves, the way they view themselves, and then in turn, the way in which they will interact with others and allow people to treat them in a way that they feel is reflective of how they view themselves. That was a very complicated way to say. If someone views themselves very negatively and doesn't have a lot of love and is very self-critical, when someone else comes along and at first they praise them and they make them feel so special and wanted and needed, that can feel really good, and they can go into that, but a lot of times that opens a doorway to when they're either one, expecting that person to provide this self-love for them, and of course that's not something someone else can provide for you because that comes from the self, but boy do we try to get that from someone else. Tell me I'm beautiful and then maybe I'll believe it. No, you have to believe it first for someone to just reaffirm that. But even if they don't, you're still okay because you know the truth, because you live it. You know that you are more than your body and that you have a soul and it is beautiful. So that's one way that we go is, we expect someone else to fulfill that role, and we put that on a lot of times men, and that is a difficult position to put them in because it's not anything that they can really do. And then the second part is it also opens you up to a lot more vulnerability and being mistreated, because at first they may compliment you and may be really nice, but then it can quickly turn to criticism. And if it's, criticism that you've given yourself, or even if it's new criticisms, it can feel all too familiar and easier to believe because, well, that's what you've been telling yourself, so I guess they see you the way that you see you, and maybe they're right. And it just opens you up to a lot more abuse, and you start accepting love that you think you deserve, and it can cause a lot of mistreatment, and I see that a lot as well. So this is a really important conversation, and we want to be having it with our young girls and our adolescents all throughout their developmental stages. But an important key element to any conversation about body image is that by actually keeping the conversation on the body itself, we unfortunately are focusing on the wrong thing. And that is why it is such a tricky topic, because we want to talk about it. We want to talk about the negative impacts of sexualizing ourselves, but then also like devaluing ourselves. But in all of those conversations, we're focusing on ourselves as our bodies. And that is the problem. That is the root cause of all of it, is every conversation, whether good or bad, is focused on the same thing. And that teaches us as young girls, and it teaches your daughters that that is important. It's important enough to have all sorts of conversations about it, when in fact we actually don't want it to be the focus. We don't want it to be the thing that we are constantly paying attention to, or reassuring, or boosting up, or, controlling. We don't want the conversation to be on our bodies. That is actually how we solve the body image issue, is we take it, honestly, as far as we can away from the body itself. And this is where it's really hard, because media, even culturally within the church, so much of the attention is on the body. As you know, I teach almost everything in the context of values. And the value here that we genuinely need to understand and need to be teaching is the understanding of our divine worth. That is a value that personally I grew up as a youth knowing and repeating. If you lived in the age of the old young women's theme where we listed off the values, one of them was divine worth. I know for myself that I had countless young women's lessons about divine worth, but to be honest, I don't think it was always taught in a way that helped me as a youth understand how valuable this value is and why it should be valuable to me. I think we often miss a key step from talking about divine worth as this idea that sounds nice versus something that is actually applicable to us, and something that we have, that we own, because we are children of God, and God being both Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. But because Heavenly Mother and even women in the scriptures are often left out of the conversation unintentionally in a lot of ways, there is just no real reflection of what divine worth looks like, sounds like, feels like. And therefore, it can make us feel disconnected, that it's just this thing that we have rather than, this ownership that we feel about it, that we can feel in our soul rather than just intellectually in our minds, knowing something versus feeling and knowing it in your heart. Those are different things. Because of this, I do think that the starting place is adding Heavenly Mother into conversation. And I'm really excited. I just heard the announcement that in Young Women's next year, they're going to focus on women in the scriptures, which I think is amazing. I think that's great. I mean, I think it would actually make a huge difference if both the young men and the young women focused on women in the scriptures. But hey, we will start with just women. We will start with the young women, because they need to feel connected to these things. They need to see themselves reflected. They need a way to relate to the scriptures and to God in a way that isn't just relating to men. They need to feel its truth for themselves and see their own experience reflected. That, I think, is the best place to start. And also, for anyone that is nervous or unsure about introducing Heavenly Mother into a conversation, I do think it is so important to talk about where the root of our current narrative comes from. So the entire story of, the reason we don't talk about her is because she's too sacred. That narrative is actually something that church historians have traced back to a seminary teacher in California named Melvin R. Brooks. To me, that is very frustrating because this person, although I'm sure Melvin was very well intentioned, in theory, yes, that sounds sweet. That's a nice sentiment that, oh, she is so sacred, she is so beloved, she is so amazing, that like God wanted to make sure that we didn't take her name in vain and that she is too sacred to be spoken of. And on the surface, that sounds really nice. But unintentionally, this narrative that Heavenly Mother is this all wonderful thing that needs to be protected actually takes away from what's actually being taught through that, which is that this all-knowing, incredibly powerful goddess is fragile, that she needs protecting. Protecting from who? And by who? By God? The one with all the power, meaning she doesn't have any? Like, that is what we're actually teaching unintentionally when we perpetuate this. And it's been going on for so many decades. And there's a lot of women now that are really quite frustrated with it and have done incredible things where they have written books. One of my favorite children's books right now is A Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother by MacArthur Krishna and Bethany Brady Spalding. And they also created a series called Girls Who Choose God, and they have a boy's guide to Heavenly Mother as well. I love their stuff, and I love that they're creating this, and it's being sold at Deseret Book, and it's being sold by these places. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts from MacArthur Krishna as well. I highly recommend her stuff. And the other people that she co-authors a lot of her books with, well, they focus on what not including Heavenly Mother in the conversation has done for women and the detriment that has had. So yes, it's nice to think that, oh, she's so wonderful and precious that we don't speak about her, but that has never doctrinally been true. And in fact, there are so many examples in the scriptures when Nephi is first taught about Christ, he's taught about it through Mary. And why does that have any significance? Well, because in the society and world that Nephi grew up in, there was a Heavenly Mother. And there's a lot that I could get into. Again, this is like a decade worth of study. And I recommend going and starting with MacArthur Krishna. And there's also an entire paper about Heavenly Mother that the church has released as well, and there's a lot of great things in there. There are books about women in the scriptures and about Heavenly Mother and Eve and Mary and the connection between them. I've read quite a few of them, and they are phenomenal. But the reason that this matters in the context of parenting, in the context of teaching this to young girls, to teaching it to adolescent, teen girls, is we need them to see their power in other women, not just men. We need them to see their power in this gospel and in God's plan, because God's plan is God being Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. It is a plan that was created for them by their heavenly parents. And even just that small shift can be immensely powerful. To keep the conversation away from body image, which I always like to say is the least important part about myself is my body, to keep it away from that. Instead, we need it to be focused on something so much bigger, something that takes up so much more space, and that is the power that we hold as women, as young women, as daughters, as sisters, as wives, as friends, as mothers. All of these things that we are all of it, and in all of our roles that we may have, ultimately we have power, and they are not just defined by our role. That our role isn't what gives us power, it's that we came into the role with power already. And it's our power that we have as daughters of God, with this divine worth, with this birthright, with plans in place for just us, that we enter into these spaces, and then we magnify these roles of nurturing and being powerful and assertive and also kind. And we have all of these qualities to us, and it's the power that we have and already possess that turns us into great sisters, great speakers, great workers, great wives, great whatever it is, that we are so much more than just our roles. Our roles aren't what give us power. We came to the conversation, we came into the role with that power already in us. And that understanding can really only start by understanding our Heavenly Mother and the power that she has, and that we were created in her image just as much as our Heavenly Father, and that we have power like her. We have qualities that she has, that these women in the scriptures, that although they may be far and few in between that are spoken of, that they exist in every chapter, even if they're not named, in the same way that women have always played a role, because we are the ones that continue society. We are the ones that have this portal to heaven within us. Whether we use it or not for childbirth, it exists in us. We have this direct pathway to the pre-earth life, to souls, to creation. That is unbelievable. That is remarkable. And when you start to understand what our bodies are capable of, the organs that we have, I mean, when I speak to adults, helping them understand even just like the clitoral network, how unreal that is. All of these nerves and this entire organ that has 18 different structures, and its only purpose is to give us pleasure. That is so powerful for so many women to discover and to learn about and be like, wait a second, what? Because once they know that, once they understand that they have this body part within them that only has a purpose of creating pleasure within their body, if they are not having pleasure in their sexual relationships, there is this huge disconnect all of a sudden. It's like, wait a second, but my body was literally made for this. I have this organ. What's going on here? I didn't know this. I had no idea. Imagine if we were able to teach our young girls and our teens, of course at age-appropriate ways, that your body matters in the sense that it has been created for you to fulfill your purpose and to go after your desires, that there are parts of you that were just made to experience pleasure and goodness. And so you want to make sure that you experience those things in the best way for you, that we're connecting our nervous system to our brain, that when we're experiencing sexual pleasure, that we're releasing these chemicals, that's what's going to happen. That's what this part of our clitoris connects to, is these parts of our brain that release these chemicals that make us feel good and make us feel connected. And we want to make sure that we're doing that with someone who we trust, who cares about us as people, as our souls, and not just as a body. Because you are so much more than just your body. We are not even going to spend 2 seconds on talking about our body, because it's only 1% of who you are. And when we shift that conversation to what your body is capable of, in the sense that what it can give to you and how important your desires are, encouraging young women and young girls to go after their desires. If they desire to dance or to sing or to bake or whatever it may be that they just are good at, that they like, that makes them happy. Helping teach them that that is important, that their desires and the things that make them feel like a creative, that those are things they should seek after, that they have divine worth and power given to them by heavenly parents, and they should work on those things, that isn't something that's secondary to what their spouse wants to do or their spouse's job or to their brothers or to some priesthood holder, that they have power that they are born with, that they don't have to be qualified for, that they don't have to be ordained to, that they were born into it. That is remarkable information for someone who has grown up maybe thinking that they were lesser than. I grew up with all brothers, and I love my brothers, but I definitely always had this sense that I was other than them, In some ways it was like, oh, you're the girl, so I didn't have to do certain things, and that was nice. That was great. I didn't have to mow the lawn, and I didn't have to do the weeds. Oh, that was so great to have those gender roles in place. And in some instances, it benefited me. But in others, it didn't. And I felt lesser than. I felt less powerful, less important. And it was just the grand culture. I don't think it was ever intentional. But I wish, more than anything, that I would have been taught as a young girl about my Heavenly Mother. That she would have had a voice in my teaching and in my upbringing. I think had I known the things that I know now, it would have changed everything about the struggles that I had, especially regarding my body and how I viewed myself and my self-worth, that I only equated my self-worth to how my body looked in comparison to other women and to these celebrities with unrealistic expectations, who have all this money in the world and take all these drugs and are able to have surgeries and blah, blah, blah to make them look that way. And intellectually, I knew it wasn't real. I was told all my life, that's not real. What you see in the magazine's not real. Okay, but there was never anyone showing me what was real. There was never an example of the opposite. It was just nothing but the counterfeit and then being told that's counterfeit. But something that's interesting and that I use a lot, I use this analogy all the time in different contexts, but for bankers, how they teach them what counterfeit bills look like is, instead of giving them a bunch of counterfeit, is they just have them deal with real money. They get them so familiar with the real thing that when they come across something counterfeit, they can recognize it more easily, rather than if they spent all their time teaching them this is what counterfeit looks like, and they'll have these signatures and it'll have these little nuances and whatever, this is what counterfeit looks like. Instead, they focus all their time and attention on teaching them what the real thing looks like, what it feels like, what it will sound like, all of those things, so that, when something counterfeit comes along, it's more easily spotted. And I think that that's what we're missing when it comes to this conversation about body image specifically, is that instead we're focusing so much on this counterfeit of these models and Ozempic and blah, 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 whatever the thing of the moment is, that we're just talking about the counterfeit, but we're not actually dealing with the real thing. And the real thing is powerful, incredible women all around us. Your neighbors, your daughters, young women's leaders, your friends, their friends' moms, and women in the scriptures, and their heavenly mother. That if we just expose them more to the real thing, and we have conversations about that, if you're talking about, wow, what makes, your friend's mom so great, so wonderful, she has such a beautiful talent, and we keep the conversation away from how she looks and how she presents herself, and instead to who she is, what we feel when you're around them, And the teachers that your kids have in their life, what makes them a good teacher? Is it because they look really good? Is it because their hair is so beautiful and pretty? Is it because she's skinny? No. It's because she makes you feel smart and capable. She explains things well. She lets you have a voice. These are the kind of traits that we want to be pointing out. These unchangeable parts of us, the parts of our soul, the parts of our divine worth that we have been given long before we were born, the parts of us that existed in the pre-earth life. That's where we want to be focusing all of our time and our attention, so that when someone comes along and makes them feel self-conscious about their body or calls them something, or maybe they have negative self-talk, that they can recognize that as, oh, that's counterfeit. That's not true. That's not what I should be focusing on. That's only, 1% of who I am as a person. So why am I giving 100% of my attention to that part of me? That's like a piano that you're given that has the capability of making incredible music and moving a nation to sing along, and instead you play one note over and over and over again, never testing out any of the other keys to make something. That to me is body image. When we only focus on how we look and how we feel about how we look and how we feel about our body, and we keep the conversation just isolated to that, it's just playing that note over and over and over again incessantly. It's just talking about the counterfeit, rather than sitting down at a piano and just playing and allowing them to see, oh my goodness, women around me, women that I know, as well as women in the scriptures that existed before, women in history, my heavenly mother, they are creators. From the tips of their fingers to their heart, their voice, their uterus that has this incredible capability, all of it, every bit and piece of who they are is a creator. You were born that way. And that focusing on just how we look and how others think we look, that is completely squandering our immense power. The power that they, hopefully, if you are teaching this from a young age, they have felt, that they have experienced. And so those thoughts will be fleeting. Those moments will be not all consuming like they are for girls that have never seen the example of womanly power. Okay, so with all of that said, where do you start? You start by first talking positively about yourself, but not just about your body. Instead of, oh, I look really good today, changing those words to, I feel really capable today. I feel really good today. I feel good in my own skin. I feel powerful. Being complimentary of yourself in front of your daughters is one of the most powerful things that you can do. When you pass by a mirror, saying something out loud that they can hear, that's a compliment to yourself. And again, try and go for things that are unchangeable. Try and look a little bit deeper than just the surface. What is something that you have done that day that made you feel good about yourself as a person? And then vocalize that. I was a really good friend today. And saying things like that so they can hear your positive self-talk, and then also so they can associate talking positively about yourself as a good thing rather than being self-centered. That being a woman is just putting yourself last. That they will learn by you vocalizing how you feel about yourself, that it's actually important to feel good and to put yourself and your desires as a top priority. That they aren't just things that you get to if everyone else is taken care of, but rather they are something that you focus on first, so you are then more capable to help others. And just in the same way that I've talked about before, for your kids to feel comfortable with any conversation about sex or sexuality, you first have to be comfortable with it. The same principle applies. If you want your daughters to respect their desires and to be able to think about their dreams and their wants and be able to be treated well and speak up for themselves and expect respect and consent and to be able to have bodily autonomy of when and how they use their body and with whom and all of that, then you must first have that because it's nothing that you're ever going to say. It's going to be what they observe in you. If you stand up for yourself, if you go after your desires, if you feel your own divine power and your own divine worth that is unchangeable, that cannot be taken nor given to you by someone else, that it is innate and within you, that it is something that you already possess, if you know that and you feel that, you will live your life differently. And that's what they will witness. And that will send a message to them, more than anything you could ever say, that, well, if mom's desires matter, then so must mine. If mom is all of these things and a mom, then I am capable of all of that. If mom's example of who she is comes from Heavenly Mother, and she's saying that I am also a daughter of heavenly parents and Heavenly Mother, well, then yeah, that feels true. That feels real. It doesn't feel counterfeit. But if you're just saying words like, oh, you have divine worth, in the same way that I felt like I had that growing up, but it was always one step away from me. But I had no example in my life of someone that felt their divine worth, of someone that exemplified what that looks like. And then I didn't have any examples really from the scriptures or from my Heavenly Mother. She was never talked about. So how was I supposed to connect with this idea if I never handled the truth? If I never, in the sense that those dollar bills, if I never touched it, if I never felt it, if I never heard it, then how was I supposed to know? Well, then you know what I'm going to handle and feel and do is I'm going to do it with things that are being talked about and discussed, which was only ever my body. And that is what happens in society, is we focus so much on women's bodies that it distracts in a large part from the power that they hold and what they are capable of. So that's where you can come in and do things differently and try and complement parts of your daughters that they cannot change, parts about them that are fundamental to who they are, the parts about them that someone else might critique. I remember always growing up being told that I was too loud, that I was too much, and that's been something that I've just always held for a long time, that insecurity that I am too much and too loud. But I just think of the impact now as an adult when people tell me that what I have to say matters. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have known that when I was young. I wish that someone would have said that what I have to say is fun and entertaining, and it's okay that it's a lot. Like, I don't have to apologize for that that's a part of who I am. That's a beautiful part of me, to be able to speak for 40 minutes straight. Like, not everyone can do that. That's a talent that I have, that is given to me. And maybe my Heavenly Mother is just this amazing, eloquent speaker. I'm sure she is. And so I got that from her. That would have been a really powerful thing to grow up knowing. Because then when someone came along and told me that I talked too much, I would have been like, well, yeah, maybe for you, but my Heavenly Mother talks this much, and she has really important things to say. And who's to say my thoughts are any less important? You know? Just placing the value of women in a place that is unchangeable, that it is their divine worth, that there is no action that they can do that will ever take that away. That is going to be so much more powerful than any conversation you could have about a body. Okay, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being along this journey. If you've listened to all 10 episodes, make sure to comment, to like, and to go follow me on Patreon to access all of the content that I teach to adults, men and women, every single day. And of course, make sure to check out sexedrescue.com for all of your resources for parenting.